This dirty, scratched state quarter sitting in your pocket right now could be worth more than a brand new luxury car. In fact, one of these ugly quarters sold for over $100,000, and most people would have spent it without a second thought. So before you ignore that worn-out coin or toss it in a jar, you might want to take a very close look. That worn-out Georgia quarter you might have dismissed as just another piece of spare change could actually be one of the most shocking hidden treasures in modern US coins, and the wild part is, it often looks completely ordinary at first glance. Now here's where things get interesting. The Georgia State Quarter, released in 1999 as part of the US Statehood Quarter program, was struck in massive numbers. Millions upon millions of them entered circulation, and because of that, most people assume they are all common and practically worthless. But that assumption is exactly why valuable examples keep slipping through people's hands unnoticed. Focus closely on the 1999 Georgia Quarter with their P Mint mark, which means it was produced at the Philadelphia Mint. On the surface, it shows the classic peach design, symbolizing Georgia's nickname as the Peach State, along with the state outline and branches. After years in circulation, many of these coins look dull, scratched, and heavily worn. That's normal. In fact, that rough appearance is exactly why people overlook the rare ones. But hidden among these everyday coins are a few incredibly valuable varieties that collectors are constantly hunting for. One of the biggest clues to watch for is something called a striking error or a die variety. Now don't worry about the technical terms, what matters is what you can actually see with your eyes. Some Georgia quarters from Philadelphia were struck with slight imperfections that create unusual doubling in the design. This means if you look carefully at the lettering, especially Georgia, e pluribus unum, or even the date, you might notice a faint shadow or doubling effect. It can look like the letters are slightly duplicated or blurred. Most people would assume that's just damage or wear. But in reality, certain types of doubling can make the coin extremely valuable. Another thing to watch for is off-center strikes. Occasionally, a coin wasn't perfectly aligned during the minting process. The result is a design that looks shifted to one side, with part of the coin blank. To the average person, that might look like a defective coin. But collectors see it very differently. Depending on how dramatic the misalignment is, these coins can sell for hundreds or even thousands of dollars. Then there are clipped planchets. This happens when the metal blank used to make the coin wasn't cut properly, leaving a curved bite missing from the edge. Again, it looks like damage, but if it came from the mint that way, it can be highly collectible. Now here's where things really start to get exciting. Some 1999 P Georgia quarters have been discovered in unusually high grades, meaning they somehow avoided heavy wear despite being released into circulation. These coins may still show minor scratches or dullness, but they retain sharp details in the design, especially in the peach, the state outline, and the text. Collectors call this mint state, and even slightly circulated examples with strong detail can still command impressive prices. In rare cases, a near-perfect Georgia quarter from this year has sold for thousands of dollars at auction. And yes, even coins that don't look perfect at first glance can still fall into this category if the key details remain intact. Here's a simple trick you can use right now. Take a Georgia quarter and tilt it under a light. Watch how the surface reflects. If you see unusual shine in protected areas, like around the letters or inside the design, it could mean the coin has retained more of its original finish than you'd expect. That's a good sign. Also, pay attention to the rim. A strong, well-defined edge is another indicator that the coin hasn't been overly worn down. Even if the surface looks scratched, a sharp rim can signal hidden value. And here's something most people never think about: sometimes their ugliest coins are the ones worth checking the most. Why? Because rare errors and valuable varieties don't always come in perfect condition. They often circulate for years before someone notices what makes them special. Imagine this for a second. Someone receives a Georgia quarter in change at a grocery store. It looks dirty, maybe a little damaged, nothing special. They spend it without a second thought. But what they didn't realize is that tiny doubling in the lettering or that slight off-center strike could have made that coin worth hundreds, or even thousands, of dollars to the right collector. That's not a rare story. It happens more often than you'd think. The truth is, coins like the 1999 P. Georgia quarter sit quietly in circulation, hiding in plain sight. They don't sparkle like gold, and they don't scream valuable. They blend in with every other quarter. And that's exactly what makes them so dangerous to overlook. Next coin. That Louisiana quarter from 2002, the one with their P mint mark that looks worn, dull, maybe even a little scratched, might seem like just another ordinary coin from the early 2000s. Most people don't even glance at it twice. They see the faded surface, the light damage, the years of circulation, and they assume it's worth exactly 25 cents. But that assumption is exactly how valuable coins keep slipping through people's hands every single day. Because hidden among these Louisiana quarters are a few rare pieces that collectors are actively searching for, and some of them don't look special at all. Now picture the design. You've got the trumpet, representing the deep musical roots of Louisiana. You've got the outline of the state, and the elegant script of Louisiana Purchase. It's a beautiful coin, but after years in circulation, most of them look tired. The shine is gone. The details are softer. Sometimes there are scratches across the surface. And that's where the story usually ends for most people. But not for collectors. What makes the 2002 P. Louisiana quarter so interesting is that certain coins were struck with subtle imperfections, tiny differences that can turn an ordinary-looking quarter into something worth hundreds, sometimes even thousands of dollars. One of the first things you want to look for is doubling. This is one of the easiest clues once you know what you're looking at. Take a close look at the lettering, especially Louisiana, E pluribus unum, and even the date, 2002. If you notice the letters look slightly thicker than normal, or if there's a faint shadow effect around them, almost like a double image, that's not just wear. That could be a double-die variety. And here's the key point, doubling doesn't always look dramatic. Sometimes it's subtle. Sometimes it just makes the text look a little off. But to a collector, that tiny detail can make all the difference. Another thing to watch for is what's called a weak or uneven strike. Now this might sound like a flaw, and technically it is, but certain types of strike issues can increase value. On some Louisiana quarters, parts of the design didn't fully transfer during minting. You might notice the trumpet looks slightly faded in certain areas, or the state outline isn't as crisp as it should be. Most people would assume the coin is just worn out. But if that softness appears in specific patterns, it could actually be a minting issue rather than simple wear, and that's where collectors start paying attention. Then there are off-center strikes. These are much easier to spot. If the design looks shifted to one side, leaving part of the coin blank, that's not damage, that's a mint error. Even a small off-center shift can make the coin more desirable. The more dramatic the shift, the more valuable it can become. And yes, even if the coin looks scratched or used, it can still carry that error. Now here's something that surprises a lot of people. Some of the most valuable Louisiana quarters aren't the ones that look perfect, they are the ones that look unusual. For example, if you come across a coin where the rim looks slightly distorted, or the edge isn't perfectly round, don't immediately assume it's damage. It could be the result of a minting issue like a clipped planchette. That curved, missing section might actually be the reason the coin is valuable. And then there's condition, something that can quietly multiply a coin's value without you even realizing it. Even though many 2002 P. Louisiana quarters are heavily circulated, a small number manage to avoid serious wear. These coins might still have scratches or minor marks, but they retain strong detail in key areas, like the trumpet, the lettering, and the overall design. When those details are sharp and well defined, collectors consider the coin to be in a higher grade. And higher grade means higher value. In fact, some Louisiana quarters in exceptional condition have sold for prices that would shock most people. We're talking hundreds or even thousands of dollars for a coin that most people wouldn't bother picking up off the ground. Here's a simple trick you can use right now. Take your Louisiana quarter and tilt it under a light. Watch how the light moves across the surface. If certain areas, especially around the lettering or inside the design, still reflect light in a smooth, almost glossy way, that's a sign the coin may have retained more of its original finish. Also check the edges. A strong, clean rim is a good indicator that the coin hasn't been excessively worn down, even if the surface looks rough. And don't forget to trust your instincts. If something about the coin looks unusual, maybe the design feels slightly off, or the text doesn't look quite right, that's worth investigating. Because here's the truth. Valuable coins don't always announce themselves. They don't glow. They don't shine like treasure. Sometimes, they look just like every other coin in your pocket, dirty, scratched, and completely forgettable. And that's exactly why they are so easy to miss. Next coin, that 2018 quarter with the little P mint mark, the one most people barely notice, maybe even the one sitting scratched up at the bottom of a coin jar right now, might look like nothing special. Just another modern coin, right? But here's the part that catches people off guard. Some of these 2018 quarters, especially the ones that look worn, dull, or even slightly damaged, have been quietly selling for hundreds, even thousands of dollars, simply because of small details that most people completely miss. Now let's focus on the design you mentioned, their pictured rocks quarter from 2018. At first glance, it shows a beautiful lakeshore scene with a kayak drifting under towering cliffs. It's part of the America the Beautiful series, and millions were made. That's why most people assume they're all common. But just like the earlier coins we talked about, the real value isn't in how many were made, it's in the rare variations hiding among them. Start with the mint mark. That small P means it was struck in Philadelphia. Now here's something many people don't realize: Philadelphia coins, especially in more recent years, have produced some surprising varieties that collectors actively hunt for. One of the biggest clues to look for on this coin is something called a die chip. This is when a tiny piece of the minting die breaks off, leaving behind a raised bump or blob on the coin. On the pictured rocks quarter, these die chips can sometimes appear in the water, along the cliffs, or even near the lettering. To the average person, it looks like a flaw. Maybe even damage. But to a collector, that little raised mark can turn a normal quarter into a collectible piece worth real money. And here's where it gets even more interesting. Some 2018 P-pictured rocks quarters have been found with what collectors call extra detail, or unexpected texture. If you look closely at the water or the rock formations, you might notice lines or patterns that don't appear on every coin. These subtle differences come from variations in the minting process. Most people would never notice them. But collectors do. Another thing to watch for is doubling, just like we talked about before. Check the words pictured rocks, Michigan, and E pluribus unum. If the letters look slightly doubled, thicker than usual, or have a faint shadow effect, that's not something to ignore. Even minor doubling on a modern coin like this can push its value far beyond face value. Now let's talk about something that surprises a lot of people: condition still matters, even for modern coins. You might think a scratched or slightly worn 2018 quarter couldn't possibly be valuable. But here's the twist: if that coin still has strong detail in key areas, like the kayak, the cliffs, and the lettering, it can still fall into a collectible grade. In fact, some coins that look imperfect at first glance still end up being graded highly because the important details remain sharp. And then there are the real standouts. Occasionally, a 2018 P-pictured rocks quarter shows up with a clear mint error, like an off-center strike. This is where the design is shifted to one side, leaving part of the coin blank. These are much easier to spot, and depending on how dramatic the error is, they can sell for hundreds or more. You might also come across coins with unusually strong or weak strikes. Maybe the design looks extra bold in some areas, or unusually soft in others. These differences might seem small, but they can make a coin stand out in the eyes of a collector. Here's a simple habit that can change everything. Whenever you get a 2018 quarter, don't just glance at it, tilt it under a light. Watch how the surface reacts. Look for anything unusual, extra bumps, strange lines, doubling in the text, or anything that doesn't look quite right. Also check the edges. A clean, strong rim combined with unusual features on the surface is often a sign that the coin deserves a second look. Because here's the reality most people don't realize. Modern coins are not automatically worthless. In fact, some of the biggest surprises in coin collecting come from recent years, coins that people assume are too new to have any value. That assumption leads to one simple mistake: people spend them without ever checking. Imagine someone using a 2018 pictured rocks quarter to pay for a coffee, not realizing that a tiny die chip or slight doubling on that coin could have made it worth far more than 25 cents. It happens all the time. And the reason it keeps happening is simple: these coins don't look valuable. They blend in. They look ordinary. Sometimes they even look damaged. But hidden inside those ordinary coins are the exact features collectors are searching for. So the next time you see a 2018 quarter with a P mint mark, especially one that looks a little scratched or worn, don't ignore it. Take a closer look at the design. Check the lettering. Look for raised bumps, unusual textures, or anything that feels different. Next coin, that 2006 Colorado quarter with their P mint mark, the one that looks worn down, maybe a little scratched, maybe even dull and lifeless, might seem like the last coin anyone would ever think is valuable. But here's the truth that surprises almost everyone. Some of these ugly Colorado quarters have quietly sold for hundreds, even thousands of dollars, simply because of tiny details that most people never notice. Now picture the design. You've got the Rocky Mountains dominating the background, with evergreen trees in the foreground and the bold inscription, Colorado, along with colorful Colorado. It's a strong, clean design. But after years in circulation, most of these coins lose their shine. They get nicked, scratched, and worn down. And that's exactly why people stop paying attention to them. But hidden among those ordinary coins are a few rare standouts. Let's start with one of the most important clues: doubling. Take a close look at the words, Colorado, Rocky Mountain, and the date, 2006. If you notice the letters look slightly thicker than usual, or if there's a faint shadow around them, almost like the text was printed twice, that's something you don't want to ignore. That subtle doubling can be the result of a die variety, and even a small amount of it can push the coin's value far beyond face value. Most people assume it's just wear or damage. Collectors know better. Next, look closely at the mountain peaks. This is where things can get really interesting. On some 2006 P Colorado quarters, the details in the mountains appear slightly distorted, softened, or uneven. At first glance, it looks like the coin has simply been worn down over time. But in certain cases, that softness is actually the result of a weak strike from the mint. That means the design didn't fully transfer onto the coin during production. And depending on how it appears, that can actually make the coin more desirable. Now here's something that really catches attention: die chips and die cracks. These are small imperfections that happen when the minting die begins to wear out or break. On the Colorado quarter, you might see a small raised bump on the surface, sometimes near the trees, sometimes along the mountains, or even near the lettering. You might also notice thin, raised lines that look like cracks running across the design. To most people, that looks like damage. But if those marks were created during the minting process, they're considered errors, and collectors love them. And then there are off-center strikes. These are easier to spot. If the design looks shifted to one side, leaving part of the coin blank, that's not post-mint damage, that's a mint error. Even a slight off-center strike can increase value, and more dramatic examples can be worth serious money. Now let's talk about condition, because this is where a lot of hidden value comes into play. Even though many 2006 Colorado quarters are heavily circulated, some manage to survive with strong detail. The mountains still look sharp. The trees are clearly defined. The lettering is crisp. Even if the coin has a few scratches or a dull surface, those strong details can place it in a higher collectible category. And higher grade coins can sell for far more than you'd expect. In fact, certain high-grade Colorado quarters have reached prices that most people would never imagine for a 25-cent coin. Here's a simple trick you can use right now. Take your Colorado quarter and tilt it under a light. Focus on the mountain peaks and the lettering. If those areas still reflect light cleanly and show clear definition, that's a good sign. Even if the rest of the coin looks worn, strong detail in key areas can mean hidden value. Also check the rim. A solid, well-defined edge is often overlooked, but it's one of the easiest ways to tell if a coin has avoided heavy wear. And don't ignore anything unusual. If something about the coin looks off, maybe a strange bump, an odd line, or slightly distorted text, that's exactly the kind of detail collectors are looking for. Because here's the reality. Valuable coins don't always look valuable. They don't always shine. They don't always look perfect. Sometimes, they look like the kind of coin you'd spend without thinking twice. Imagine someone getting a 2006 Colorado quarter in change, noticing it looks a little rough, maybe even slightly damaged, and deciding it's not worth keeping. They spend it on something small, never realizing that a tiny die crack or subtle doubling could have made that coin worth for more than 25 cents. Next coin. That 2007 Wyoming quarter with their P mint mark, the one that looks dull, scratched, maybe even a little beat up, might seem like the most ordinary coin in your pocket. But here's the twist that shocks most people. Some of these Wyoming quarters, even the ones that look worn and unimpressive, have quietly sold for hundreds, even thousands of dollars, simply because of tiny details hiding in plain sight. Now picture the design. You've got the iconic bucking horse and rider, one of the most recognizable images in the entire State Quarters series. It's bold, simple, and easy to overlook after years of circulation. Most of these coins have lost their shine. They've picked up scratches, nicks, and dull surfaces from being passed around thousands of times. And that's exactly why valuable ones keep getting missed. Let's start with one of the biggest clues, doubling. Take a close look at the words Wyoming, the equality state, and the date, 2007. If the letters look slightly thicker than usual, or if you notice a faint shadow around them, almost like the text is duplicated, that could be a double die variety. It doesn't have to be dramatic. Even subtle doubling can make a coin far more desirable to collectors. Most people see that and think it's just wear. But that small detail can change everything. Next, focus on the horse and rider. This is where some of the most interesting variations show up. On certain 2007 P Wyoming quarters, you might notice unusual texture or extra thickness in parts of the design, especially around the horse's body or the rider's outline. This can sometimes be caused by a die chip or die break. In simple terms, a tiny piece of the minting die breaks off, leaving behind a raised bump or blob on the coin. To the average person, it looks like damage or a flaw. If something about the coin feels different, maybe the design looks slightly off, or the texture isn't consistent, that's exactly the kind of detail collectors are searching for. Because here's the reality. Valuable coins don't always look valuable. They don't shine. They don't stand out. Sometimes, they look like the kind of coin you'd spend without thinking twice. Imagine someone getting a 2007 Wyoming quarter in change, seeing the scratches, the dull surface, and assuming it's just another 25-cent coin. They spend it on something small, never realizing that a tiny die chip or subtle doubling could have made that coin worth far more. Goodbye, guys.